Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you find it helpful as you look to work on water stewardship with ICCR members. This webinar is intended to be an introduction to our water program, highlighting the program's goals, focus sectors, and asks or requests that we're making of the companies. You'll be hearing from me in addition to a few ICCR members who are working on this program. As a lot of ICCR's work is best learned by doing, with this webinar, we hope you feel comfortable just jumping in. And as we begin, please feel free to either enter your questions in the question box or raise your hand, and I'll call on you during our Q&A, which will be at the end of our introduction to the water program. So we'll begin. As you can see on this first slide here, my contact information, and we do have a monthly call on the subject every fourth Monday of the month. And later on the slide, you'll see the schedule for some of our upcoming calls. And I invite you to sign up to the water group on the ICCR members area. Overall, our high-level goal on water is ensuring the sustainable use of water resources that assures adequate water supply to support livelihoods, particularly for the poor and vulnerable, and healthy ecosystems on which we all depend. We do this work by focusing on our water stewardship program on a few key sectors, including food and agriculture, textile, energy and automotive, mining, and a few members also engage with the pharmaceutical sector. Our members are engaging close to 40 companies on water. In these engagements, we are asking companies to adopt comprehensive water stewardship policies that will set the company up to assess, reduce, and report on their water consumption and pollution in their business operations, and importantly, throughout their supply chains. In this webinar, we will highlight 3 focus areas for the next year: the meat sector, food and beverage, and leather. Here is a snapshot of all the companies we're engaged with this last shareholder season, so 2017. More than likely, almost all of these engagements will continue for the 2018 shareholder season, which starts pretty much about now. So getting into the fall of this year, we'll be starting our 2018 shareholder season. Why are we a year ahead? That's because the company's annual general meetings will be held in May or June of 2018. So we call this our 2018 shareholder season. If you hold any of these companies and are interested in joining these engagements, please sign up to the ICCR database. If you are an affiliate member and don't have access to the database, you can contact me if you're interested, and I can make sure that you're in touch with the right people and give you as much background information as you need. We are well aligned with the UN goal, Sustainable Development Goal 6 on water, in particular Target 6.1, which says by 2030, achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all. Target 6.3, by 2030, improve water quality by reducing pollution. And 6.4, by 2030, substantially increase water use efficiency across all sectors, and ensure sustainable withdrawals and supply of fresh water to address water scarcity. All stakeholders should work towards contributing to the UN SDGs. As we encourage companies to positively contribute, we are making efforts as well to do the same. So what are some of the water risks companies face, and why are we raising this issue to companies? Companies are faced with physical, regulatory, and reputational risks, as you see outlined here. Water scarcity is either the lack of enough water, so that's on the quantity side, or lack of access to safe water on the quality side. How water is conserved, used, and distributed, and the quality of the water available can determine if there is enough to meet the demands of households, farms, industry, and the environment. Climate change, of course, is further exacerbating the quality and availability of water resources. And if a company is operating in a water scarce area of the world, impacting availability for other water users, or they are polluting water sources, they can be impacting a community's human right to water. Even if this is just a perception and not a reality, a community's concern about access or quality of water can cause a reputational risk to companies. So on the slide here, an outline of some of the risks that we speak to in our engagements, all of which, of course, contribute to the financial risk, which all of our companies care so deeply about. On to our corporate goals. So we raise all of these potential risks to companies in our engagements, and as the business case or rationale for why they should act and have in place policies, practices, procedures that mitigate these risks. So as I spoke to before on policy, adopting and implementing a water stewardship policy and recognizing the human right to water. On practices that are consistent with corporate responsibility and good water stewardship. And procedures that respectfully engage the community in order to secure both the social and legal license to operate. On this next slide, you can see a little bit more of an in-depth picture on what we mean on these corporate goals in terms of outlining here a stewardship journey for companies. So at a high level, here is what the water stewardship journey of companies on water ought to look like, which marries well with ICCR's hierarchy of impact, which is our own benchmarking scheme, that pyramid that you see there. And that pyramid is applicable to any issue that ICCR members engage with and on, and how companies ought to address environmental and social issues. So our hierarchy of impact and this image here of the water stewardship journey highlights that at the beginning stage, we expect that a company is going to acknowledge this issue, that there's some awareness of the issue at hand, be it water, food, climate change issues, human trafficking, etc. Next up, we want the company to understand what its impacts are and adopt a policy to combat those impacts, to create goals and plans and develop metrics, to benchmark themselves against peers, to engage in with stakeholders, and as local as they can possibly get on the stakeholder engagement, more positive for their social license to operate. And participating in public policy, influencing governance, where possible, is also something that we're looking for companies to do. Importantly, public disclosure throughout each of these elements on that journey is important. We want companies to be transparent about their approach on water and any issue that they take on, and we want them to engage with stakeholders. You'll see on our pyramid there that benchmark 8 is that ICCR acknowledges company progress. We've changed that a tad because we want to continue to encourage companies to do well. And so we are acknowledging companies' progress throughout each of these benchmarks. So if they're beginning to acknowledge the issue, beginning to develop policies and put in place goals, we want to be sure that we're giving them kudos for those movements. Here, sorry about the wordiness of this slide, but this gives you a deeper level insight into our corporate goals. So we are asking companies to develop a comprehensive water stewardship policy that takes into account the concept of water as a very local issue, asking companies to develop goals that are specific to location at a country or basin level and not just an overall global reduction goal. Each basin has unique challenges that need to be considered when managing its water resources. Context-based metrics and targets recognize the particular challenges present in an area. In order to be effective, besides addressing site-specific concerns, context-based water metrics and targets should include input from local stakeholders, be informed by contextual social needs, and make the best use of available science. All important here in terms of context-based water targets, what we've seen from companies is that they tend to give a goal for their entire operation. So 10% by 2020 for, Procter & Gamble or for CocaCola. So just a high level overall goal. What's more helpful is that if they put those goals into a context, so if there's a water scarcity issue happening in a particular basin in India, their goal ought to be one that is specific to that area, that will have greater benefit to that particular area, and 10% reduction might not do it. It may be 20 or 30%, for example, in an area that's water stressed. That second bullet there in water quality, declining water quality has become a global issue of concern as human populations grow, industrial and agricultural activities expand, and climate change results in unpredictable weather events. So globally, the most prevalent water quality problem is caused by high nutrient loads, which is basically nutrient pollution caused by phosphorus and nitrogen. And those sources normally include agricultural runoff, industrial effluents, and fossil fuel burning. So all the more reason for us to engage companies on water quality issues. On the SDGs, unless private companies seize the market opportunities to the SDGs and advance progress on a range of goals, neither business nor the rest of the world will gain the benefits that stem from achieving them. And finally, public disclosure. Companies that choose not to respond or disclose their efforts can be perceived as having a limited understanding of their risk or no meaningful progress to report, which should cause concern for the company and for investors that they're not adequately assessing or dealing with the risk that they potentially face. So we're asking all companies we engage with to publicly disclose their water management via the CDP water disclosure, and CDP, formerly known as Carbon Disclosure Project, which is the go-to platform for investors to analyze companies' exposure to water risks and their plans to address them. Through CDP, more than 600 institutional investors with assets of over $67 trillion are asking companies to disclose how they're managing water risks, and hence it being our go-to. And we encourage all companies to respond via CDP because then it creates sort of a level playing field, consistency in reporting. We can better compare companies as they report out on what they're doing on water. And sorry, I said finally on public disclosure, but finally, we wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the human right to water. And I'll turn things over now to Mari Schwartzer, Assistant Director of Shareholder Activism, Engagement, and Social Research at North Star Asset Management.
Thank you, Nadira. North Star has been filing shareholder resolutions on the human right to water for a full decade now, due to our concern for community access to water, as well as our belief in corporations' responsibility to the communities in which they do business. A company's reputation and its social license to operate can be dependent upon how the company interacts with the community and whether it respects the most basic human right to water. In 2010, the UN General Assembly and Human Rights Council both recognized in separate resolutions that the right to water and sanitation is a human right. They define the elements of the human right to water as safe, sufficient, acceptable, physically accessible, and affordable water. The UN also recognizes the importance of non-discrimination and accountability, as well as community participation. Our firm is a socially responsible asset management firm based in Boston, and many of our staff, including our CEO, come from a community organizing background. So our perspective is that the human right to water is important for all companies that do business which involves the use of water. We believe they need to have an ethical guiding framework through which company management makes business decisions. We want companies taking stock of their water usage and wastewater disposal methods, but we also want companies to be actively on the ground in the communities in which they do business, talking to community members, getting their consent to extract water, and truly understanding how the company may affect that community. When a company brings a human rights lens to its water management efforts, it means focusing on water-related risks related to people and the communities in which it does business, rather than just water-related risks to the business. And on the next slide, you'll see an example of, there we go, an example of the human right to water policy adopted by PepsiCo in 2009 due to our engagement through the proxy process. This is a great example of a company that challenged us at first, but really got on board when we filed it a second time and they were willing to engage. Not only that, but Pepsi went on to share this commitment on this issue at the UN CEO Water Mandate meeting in Stockholm, and even earned an award for their work on water, which was due at least in part to our engagement with them. We still consider this particular policy to be the gold standard that we use for engagements with other companies. In total, North Star has successfully negotiated the adoption of policies committing the company to supporting the human right to water at 9 corporations in our clients' portfolios. Our successes include major companies such as Johnson & Johnson and Intel, as well as smaller companies like several water utilities. In our engagement experiences, most companies have never considered specifically developing a business decision ethical lens related to the human right to water. But given water scarcity and increasing climate change, we believe that companies must continue to lead on this issue. We expect to file this proposal for many years to come in order to ensure that companies that interact with water are monitoring and minimizing their own water use, but are also engaging local communities to fully respect the community members' right to water and sanitation.
Great, thanks, Mari. And as I mentioned, in this webinar, we want to highlight 3 focus areas for the next shareholder season. So the meat sector, food and beverage, and leather. So next up, we'll hear from Gina Falada, Program Associate at the TriState Coalition for Responsible Investment, on one of our focus sectors, the meat sector, and our engagements on water quality. Gina?
Thanks, Indira. So starting last year, ICCR, together with Ceres, a partner in our water and climate work, initiated a campaign to address water quality risks facing the meat sector. Animal manure, excess fertilizer applied to fields and crops, and soil erosion make agriculture one of the largest sources of nitrogen and phosphorus pollution in the country. Fertilizer and manure pollution from animal agriculture is a source of significant greenhouse gas emissions. The contribution to climate change makes water risks even more challenging. For example, Hurricane Matthew prompted loss to the meat industry, local pollution crisis, and community and ecological health threats in North Carolina a year ago. So on the next slide, you can see the companies where we already have leads and are seeking leads. Our target companies have received investor engagement letters signed by investors with over $1.2 trillion in assets under management, shareholder proposals with Tyson, Sanderson Farms, and Pilgrim's Pride, and have been engaged with in direct dialogue. Because we didn't want to leave some of the major players out, we're also engaging with Cargill and Purdue, both private companies. If any of you hold debt in these companies, we invite you to lead these engagements. Additionally, we are adding a new company, Saputo, to the list for engagement this year, and are seeking a lead for dialogue engagement. It's a Montreal-based Canadian dairy company, and the first ask for this company would be to respond to the CDP water disclosure. To the next slide. Digging deeper into sector-specific asks, the request of the meat sector companies to adopt and implement a water stewardship policy that is designed to reduce risks of water pollution throughout the supply chain. On behalf of the American Baptist Home Mission Society, TriCry filed shareholder proposal this season at Tyson Foods, asking the company to adopt and implement a water stewardship policy designed to reduce risks of water contamination at Tyson-owned facilities, facilities under contract, and Tyson's feed suppliers. So this resolution is a refile, and last year it received about 14%. And what we're asking companies to include in our water stewardship policy is requirements for leading practices for nutrient management and pollutant limits throughout direct operations, contract farms, and feed suppliers, with a focus on verifiably reducing nitrate contamination, reporting on time-bound goals, key performance indicators, and metrics demonstrating conformance to the policy, financial and technical support to help implement the policy, and a transparent mechanism to regularly disclose progress on adoption and implementation. So we just submitted our filing last Friday, and we will be welcoming co-filers, and the deadline to file will be August 24th. We have also scheduled a dialogue with the company on August 25th, and if you are interested, please contact Mary Beth Gallagher, the Executive Director at TriState Coalition.
Great, thanks so much, Gina. And our next focus area is the food and beverage sector, which sources agricultural ingredients for its products. Mary Minette, Director of Shareholder Advocacy at Mercy Investment Services, will take it from here.
Thanks, Nadira. So as you can see from this chart, about 70% of the world's freshwater withdrawals are made by the agricultural sector. And in the US, they account for about 80% of our national water consumption, and over 90% in many Western states, many of which are struggling with water scarcity issues. So this is a big part of the water use in our country and globally. And most big food companies are really ignoring the significant water risks that they face because they are so dependent on the agricultural sector for their products. Research by Ceres has shown that too many companies are not evaluating the water issues in their agricultural supply chains, and nor do they have goals to more sustainably source their crops using responsible water practices. So investors have begun to engage many large food and beverage companies on the water risk in their supply chains, noting that there is both reputational risk posed by these issues, as many of them are consumer-facing companies, but also the pressure for more sustainable practices that come from large purchasers in the marketplace for companies that sit deeper in the supply chain, like big agribusiness firms. So many of these are companies that we have been engaging for many years: Archer Daniels Midland, CocaCola, Dean Foods. And in recent years, what we're doing is moving beyond the direct impacts of their operations on water to which for these companies is often substantial. For instance, Coca-Cola, because they're a beverage company, has major water risk embedded in their direct operations. But moving beyond that to discuss water risk in their supply chains. These discussions often relate to other critical issues. For example, the discussions with Archer Daniels Midland, led by TriState Coalition, include not only water risk, but also human rights issues and deforestation concerns. The conversation with Coca-Cola about its agricultural supply chain is looking not only at water risk, but also at climate change risk in their supply chain. And so, although many of these are ongoing and long-term dialogues, there are some new opportunities that are coming up this year with Costco and Metro, which is a Canadian company. And the ask in both of those cases will be that they respond to the CDP water disclosure on their water management practices. Thanks. So taking a little deeper dive into what we're asking specifically here, we want the company to assess their water risks in areas where they source their ingredients and to develop goals to more sustainably source these ingredients. Further, they should be incentivizing the farmers that sit in their supply chain to strengthen their water stewardship practices. For companies that source agricultural products from far-flung parts of the world and from multiple types of producers and wholesalers, this can be daunting and a complex process. But as climate change continues to impact water supply globally, it will be increasingly important for companies that depend on agriculture to understand and to manage these risks.
Great, thanks, Mary. And I just want to make a point. I mean, we've mentioned CDP a few times here with some of these company engagements. And the reason why we want to start with a CDP disclosure is just to understand where the company is currently at on assessing their water risks, on their water management policy. So that just gives us, by answering that questionnaire, they will give us a sense of where things are, and then we can have a better sense and start the road to engagement on specific issues. Our last focus area is on the impact of the leather sector in Hazarabad, Bangladesh, named among the top 10 polluted sites in the world. Kate Monahan, Program Associate at Friends Fiduciary, will walk us through this issue area.
Thank you, Nadira. So Hazarabad is home to Bangladesh's leather tannery sector, and more than 150 tanneries have covered 50 acres in the past 60 years there. And as you can see on this slide, the leather tanning sector is enormously responsible for the degradation of the river located there, which is called the Buriganja. And the water of the Buriganja is now so polluted that all fish in the river have died. The river flows by the capital, Dhaka, which is a city of 12 million people, and which largely depends on the Buriganja's water for drinking, fishing, and carrying merchandise. So there are chemicals such as cadmium and chromium, other elements such as mercury, which are also creeping into the groundwater there. So those are posing a very serious threat to public health. Moreover, there are thousands of people who are working in these tanneries, where school children pick up scraps before moving on to more dangerous tasks like dipping hides in acid. Many do so without gloves or even shoes, making skin and respiratory ailments common. There's one estimate that says that 90% of tannery workers die before age 50. So given the implications for worker health and safety in these operations, in addition to the public health impacts of their contaminated water sources, we are jointly carrying out this initiative across the Human Rights and Labor Program and water. So earlier this year, we partnered with Transparentum, which is a nonprofit that adopts frontline investigative reporting and forensic methods in compliance with international ethical standards to illuminate supply chains and spur eradication of human and environmental abuses. So their investigations unearthed the connection between the leather tanneries and huge, mostly American brands, which are noted on this slide, and it also pointed out the vast health and safety violations. So as a result, the government of Bangladesh finally ordered that the tannery operations should be shut down in Hyderabad and moved to another site called Savar. However, not all the tanneries have moved. So we are engaging the global brands who source from this area to commit to using their leverage to ensure the relocation site is up and running and their suppliers are making the move and complying with labor and environmental regulation and policy. So we're asking companies to adopt policies for all tiers of their supply chain labor rights and water contamination, and asking them to join the Leather Working Group, which is a multi-stakeholder group comprised of brands, retailers, leather manufacturers, chemical companies, and other relevant parties in the leather supply chain.
Thanks, Kate. So moving on here to some tools to help you do this work. We have the ICCR Statement of Principles and Recommended Practices for Corporate Water Stewardship. It's a mouthful of a title, but here this tool highlights our position on water and puts forward the principles from which we operate and the practices we are calling on companies to adopt. So we encourage members to use this with your company engagement, so that you can get a sense of what we're asking companies to do, to use this document with your networks and allies to share our perspective on water and with communities that you are engaged with, so that they can also see where we, what our position is on water. And of course, if you'd like to share this with companies, you can also do that, but I'd love to know when you do so that we can follow up with the company on their thoughts on our practices for corporate water stewardship. This document is public. It's on our public website in addition to our members area of the website. We'll be doing a couple of updates. The last, this edition is a little bit dated, so we want to update this for the next shareholder season. So we'll be putting in some effort on that later this fall. But you can, by looking at this document now, you can get a general sense of ICCR's position on water. Next up here is a set of tools, another set of tools on water external to ICCR that we use quite frequently in our engagements. So these are tools that we recommend to companies and also use ourselves, so that we have a greater understanding of how companies can assess their risks, the policies that they should be putting in place, how best they should be disclosing that information, and how best they should be engaging with different stakeholder groups. In addition to this list of resources here, I'll be working on a more comprehensive work plan for our issues on water. And within that, I will outline specific resources for each sector that our colleagues just went through. So look for that in time for our September conference, so later on in the fall. I want to shift things over to Anna Falkenberg, Executive Director of the Socially Responsible Investment Coalition in Texas, to share a little bit about how she's gotten involved and ways in which you can get involved in this work.
Thanks, Nadira. I've been involved at ICCR as a participant in many dialogues and enabling co-filers to work to co-file resolutions. But I was very strongly called to participate more actively. I come from an area in Texas prone to drought, and we had lived through a drought recently. we are monitoring currently the fracking industry here very near us and the extensive use of fresh water in that process. So when I was asked to consider taking on the lead for one of the companies, one of the meat companies, Pilgrim's Pride, I felt absolutely like I must continue and consider this and do this work. I grew up near a Tyson processing plant, so I was very well aware of what companies like this can do to the water in our environment. So I got involved. And how can you? We have some steps that you can take, certainly. One important thing is to use the ICCR database, sign up for existing actions or add a new action with a company you'd like to lead with. The database is our central hub for communicating ongoing engagements and opportunities to join these engagements. Affiliate members do not have access to the database, but you can be in touch with the staff who can help. Then join the monthly calls. We share engagement updates, discuss strategy with the sectors, and have speakers update us on the latest research and tools related to water stewardship. Go ahead and jump in. The best way to learn is to learn by doing this work. So test the waters. Sign up to participate in 1 or 2 engagements as a way to get your feet wet and see how engagements unfold. Buddy up. Find a member or ask a staff member to pair you up with a long-term member to be your guide on how we engage with companies, the nature of our engagements on water. And finally, call a staff member. Staff are always eager for new members to actively participate in this work and will happily take the time to answer questions, address concerns, and help you prepare to engage. So sign up to our water group on the members area, receive announcements and action alerts, visit resources and articles, and see our calendar of dialogues.
Great, thank you so much, Anna. Yes, and again, feel free to call us anytime and even to reach out to members. If you're in the shareholder database and you're interested in a particular company, you can reach out to the lead there to find out more background about where that company has been historically on the engagement and where that lead and the participants there hope the engagement will go next. So feel free and reach out to staff and members. There are many ways to participate, as Anna mentioned. So here is just a nifty chart of ways to do that. So you can co-lead, you can join an existing engagement, you can help us to build relationships with NGOs or academics in your home state, or help us to connect with communities, for example. You can co-file proposals. So as Gina mentioned, there's a proposal right now in front of Tyson, so you can co-file on that proposal and others to come for the rest of the fall. You can lend your proxies to partners in this work. So in a lot of this work, we are not doing it alone, but we are calling upon different partners on the ground who give us the greatest intel and help to provide information in which we capture in our resolutions and bring in front of the company in dialogue. And so oftentimes those partners would love to be front and center at annual general meetings so they can get their concern in front of the board and the CEO. So that's an opportune time to lend your proxies to have those partners participate in those meetings. And then, via communication support. So you can share the work that we're doing in your own newsletters. You can retweet us or tweet and use social media channels to get the word out on the water work that we're doing as a coalition. And importantly here, that on that last column, serve as a liaison to outside community groups and affected communities in particular. So any ways in which you've identified affected communities, if they've come to you, feel free to put them in touch with us. And again, the more information that we have about what's happening on the ground, the better our engagement is in terms of getting to a solution that's impactful. So I know that was a lot to cover in our webinar and just a tease in terms of the wealth of work that we're doing on water. Again, if you have any questions or comments, you can enter that into the question box, or you can raise your hand to ask any. And there's a few that's come in, and both of which are asking for copies of the slides, especially given that we have a list of companies there. I'll be sure to send out a list of the slides, but in addition, as I mentioned, we're working on a work plan for this area, which will document a lot of what was said on the call today, along with action steps, specific action steps you can take, and outline the companies there as well. So that'll be ready in time for September. But more immediately, I can send out a copy of the slides, take a look at the shareholder database for the upcoming 2018 shareholder season, and sign up to any companies where you have an interest. So are there any other questions? I don't see any others coming into the chat box, and I see some raised hands, but I think I've answered them as I see your name in the chat function as well. So I have a couple of other slides just on the mechanics of doing the work for those that are interested. And so, how do members actually carry out an engagement? So amongst the first things that one should do is research the companies. So we always ask our members when they are leading a company or participating in an engagement to know what that company is about, know what they're doing, and identify ways that they may or may not be addressing the issue that's of concern to you. So for example, on water, are they talking about water on their sustainability website or CSR reports? Are they talking about the issue in their 10K? Do they have any special reports on water, for example? So these are ways to identify what the company has been doing on the issue already. The next step, usually when we start an effort, is we simply write a letter to the company to understand more. So if you've read all of those documents and you only see, 1 or 2 lines about water, or you don't see water at all, start by outlining a letter to the company, explaining who you are, what your concerns are, and what you want the company to do on the issue. So do you want them to do a water risk assessment? If they have one already in place, do you want them to set goals on water, for example? And importantly, identify who's the best person to send that letter to. So the company may have a specific person responsible for sustainability, or they may have somebody responsible for water, which is even better. And if none of those folks exist, then we usually take the route of sending it to members of the board and or the CEO. The next stage is usually scheduling a dialogue engagement. So if you get a response to that letter, normally the company will say that they're willing to talk to you about the issue. And then if you don't get a response, then all the more reason to reach out and see if you can get a dialogue on the books. And sometimes you may have to send a couple of letters before there is a response. If all else fails, then prepare to file a shareholder proposal. And so usually that gets the attention of the companies really quickly. So within a short time, you may actually hear back from the company on their willingness to engage, given that they've received now this resolution in front of them. As you're preparing to file a proposal, be sure to check our database where you will find information about the filing deadline, because you have to get that proposal in the hands of the company ahead of that filing deadline. And then if this proposal ends up on the company's proxy, so if they don't challenge the proposal, and if you don't negotiate the proposal away, and if the proposal is on the proxy, a good step is to reach out to proxy advisory services to build support for your proposal, because we want them to vote in favor of the proposal that you have on deck. And here's a quick slide just summarizing who can file a proposal. Most of you already likely know this, but here's a quick snapshot of what some of the requirements are. And so what happens after you file a proposal? As I mentioned, you can wait for the company to respond. They may do nothing. They may ask you and others to withdraw your resolution, or as I mentioned before, the company may respond by challenging the proposal at the SEC. So depending on what they do, that sort of gears you up for your next step. So if the company chooses to do nothing, then it goes to a vote. Fine. You show up at the annual general meeting to move your proposal or send a colleague in your stead, make a great statement at that annual general meeting to really raise the issue in front of other investors and the board. If you are willing to withdraw the proposal, make sure that everyone who's participating in that resolution proposal process is on board with the criteria that you develop to withdraw your proposal. It's really key to make sure that everyone's in agreement when you withdraw that proposal. And you want to be sure that you are withdrawing for more than a willingness for the company to continue dialoguing on the issue. Sometimes that's enough if the company is particularly hard to move, but you want to really get something out of that dialogue, whether there's a willingness to put in a paragraph or two in their sustainability report on the issue versus a full-on report, which we would have initially asked for, just something concrete that we can continue to build on this engagement. And if the proposal is challenged at the SEC, we usually use our best efforts here and a lawyer on hand to fight that challenge if we think that it's winnable, if we have a case to be made. And that's basically it. So again, another tease here on the mechanics of how we do this work. And I'm happy to answer any questions as they come up as you're engaging in this work. And so with that, if there are no other questions, we can end our webinar here. Any other questions? I'm looking for hands raised or questions in our chat box. Okay, great. So thank you all for joining us today. So this webinar was recorded. You can feel free to share that recording with your colleagues. I will send out an email with that information shortly, along with the slides. So again, thanks all for making it today, and special thank you to our members who participated on the line to share the good work that we are doing together. Thanks, everyone.